love Thomas and Friends. Anyone who watches the channel will know that already, and you'll also know that my love of the franchise has had quite a few ups and downs over the years. By that I don't mean the quality of the content, although that's gone through its own ups and downs as well. I mean that my own love of Thomas and Friends has been put to the test on many separate occasions. At the time of this recording, I am just diving into the Nitrogen era / Sharon Miller era of Thomas and Friends, and I can see why so many fans became disillusioned with the franchise at this point in time. With the content being churned out showing a real decline in quality since the classic era, it's not surprising that so many people took a step back, and in some cases never returned. It reminded me of my own days in the Thomas wilderness before I rekindled my love of the franchise. And it got me thinking, I want to record a video about my relationship with Thomas and Friends. Many content creators talk about why they love Thomas and Friends. For example, the stories, set design, narration, music, and direction. But not many people go into their own personal journey with the franchise. The good times, the bad times, and why they continue to re-watch it after all these years. I've touched on it briefly in previous videos, but today I'm going into full detail on my journey with the franchise. From first discovering Thomas and Friends, to my societal pressure phase, falling in love with the franchise once again, and the criticism that I get now. I wanted to do this video for two reasons, so fans of my channel can get to know me on a more personal level, and to remind myself why the franchise means so much to me, even in my darkest days. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this completely self-indulgent video on Andrew Durning, the awkward, insecure boy who became the Ginger Engine, the awkward, insecure man. And as all stories do, let's start at the beginning. I was born on the 30th of June 1987, but Thomas and Friends was already a part of my family before I arrived on the scene. My older brother was born in 1984, the same time a certain TV series appeared on UK television. Like all children of that time, my brother had the VHS tapes of Thomas and Friends Season 1, and when I was born, like all good brothers do, he passed those tapes on to me because he had found his franchise, which he had a passion for, the Transformers. For those that want to see why my brother loves this franchise, I'll be sure to put the link to his channel, The Ginger Transformer, in the description below. My parents probably thought that I would follow suit, in the sense that I would like Thomas for a couple of years and then move on to the next phase. But it didn't quite work out that way. I became obsessed with Thomas and Friends, watching every 40-minute video on average about 3 times a day, and I would cry hysterically when the tape had to be rewound before I could watch it again. Over the years, I not only took on the baton of the Thomas fan in the family, but I ran with it. And probably further than most expected. I collected every video I could get with what little money my parents had. My room was covered in Thomas wallpaper, bedspreads, lamps, you name it, I had it. I would buy books, annuals, and expect my parents to read them to me every single night until I could read myself. I had multiple Thomas playsets, ranging from Ertl to Tommy. I had Thomas cutlery, plates, mugs, egg cups, and I didn't even like eggs. If I was given chocolate that was shaped like Thomas, I wouldn't eat it because I wouldn't want to not have that Thomas thing anymore. If I was going to my gran and papa's to stay overnight, I had to take something with me that was Thomas related, otherwise I wouldn't go. Until they started buying little Thomas things that they could keep at their flat so that I would go and stay with them. They even recorded the BBC documentary The Thomas the Tank Engine Man so that I could watch it at their flat. And even though I was still too young to fully understand the adult themes of the documentary, I would watch it religiously because it was something to do with Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends. As I started going to places like nursery and primary school, I got very, very frightened. The world was big, scary, and I didn't fit in. If other children tried to talk to me, I would run and hide from them. They seemed strange to me. They played outside, they built sandcastles, played sports, all things that were considered normal kids stuff, but to me it wasn't normal. All I wanted to do was go home and watch my Thomas and Friends videos, or of course play with my Thomas toys. Just as I thought, other children were strange, those children also thought I was strange or a crybaby. But I didn't care because I had Thomas. Thomas never judged me, never called me names, never said that I looked weird because I had red hair and big round glasses. Thomas made me feel safe and loved during times when I didn't love myself. At night, I used to dream about visiting the island of Sodor, going on Thomas's branch line with Annie and Clarabelle, riding along with Percy to the harbour at the big station, taking a quiet run with Toby and Henrietta, or going flying along the line in Gordon's Express. To me, that was a possibility because the island of Sodor felt like a real place. In the back of my mind, I knew that it wasn't real, but I would say to myself, the stories are so realistic that they must be based on a real place, and if I could get there, I would never come home. Thomas and Friends wasn't only my first love, outside of family, but also my closest friend. Anytime I would hear Ringo Starr's voice in another show, like for example The Simpsons, I would cry with happiness because that was the voice of Thomas the Tank Engine. If Thomas was referenced in any other TV show, I had the biggest smile on my face that anyone had ever seen. And if there were other train-related shows that weren't Thomas, I would get upset because in my mind there was only one train-related show, and that was Thomas and Friends. As the years went on, people became more and more concerned about me liking Thomas and Friends. While other children my age were moving on to shows that were deemed as more age appropriate, I wasn't. I was stuck in my Thomas and Friends bubble. I had other passions like acting and singing. I liked grown-up TV shows like Star Trek and Red Dwarf, as well as a slew of other children's TV programs of the time, such as The Simpsons, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and Batman the Animated Series. But in my eyes, none of them could hold a candle to Thomas and Friends. That was the show that couldn't be topped. The one bastion of light in a world that, to me, was just getting darker. By the time I was 10, which is 1997 for anybody still keeping track, I felt like I was under more and more pressure to conform to society. To me, there seemed to be an unwritten rule that by the time you reached a certain age, you weren't allowed to like certain things anymore. And if you did, you weren't allowed to tell people because you would get bullied for it. By this point in my life, it felt like the friends I had, the whole two of them, were starting to drift away from me. They liked sports, they liked board games, and I wasn't good at either of those things. Most of the time I would play on my own, or with my imaginary friend Edward. And yes, he is based on the number 2 engine from Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends. What was a TV show that made me feel safe and loved soon became an object of ridicule and scorn. People would laugh at me for liking Thomas and Friends. They'd take my Ertl toys and they would throw them in the bin. And if anything was brought up in school that was related to a train, the other kids would laugh at me and say that I would like it because I was the silly baby that loved the choo-choo train show. So I became even more withdrawn from the world around me. And it felt like it got to the point where I had to make a choice. Either leave Thomas and Friends behind, or be left behind by society. So I made what for me was the most heartbreaking decision that I could make. I moved everything Thomas related into our loft. I asked my dad to paint over my Thomas wallpaper, and I asked my mum to donate any Thomas memorabilia that I had to charity. And I started trying as hard as I could to fit. This is now what is known amongst the fandom as my societal pressure phase. Liking Thomas and Friends became something that was well known to a dirty little secret. Instead of watching Thomas downstairs in the living room, I could only watch it on my TV in my bedroom, and I had to quickly return the VHS back to the loft before my parents came home from work. If I saw a Thomas and Friends magazine or comic in the shop, as much as I wanted to buy them, I had to tell myself that I couldn't now, because I needed to grow up and start liking normal things. But no matter how hard I would try, occasionally I would slip up. What I mentioned about seeing Thomas and the Magic Railroad, but as we moved into the early 2000s, I would try and watch the occasional Thomas and Friends episode on Channel 5's Milkshake before I went to school. And if I had a bad day at school, which, let's face it, it was almost every day, I would sneak those videos down from the loft and watch them to try and make myself feel better. And again, have to return them before my parents got back from work. I would go up to the loft and just sit and look at my old Thomas toys and think of happier times. But I couldn't play with them because I didn't want to be that guy. stereotypical virgin that lived with his parents in his 40s and turned his room into a giant model train set. Nowadays, having a model railway in your house is seen as cool, but back then, it was a death sentence to your social standing. So to me, the only way that I could kick this habit was by going cold turkey. And I got rid of every single piece of Thomas and Friends that I had left. All my toys, all my videos, gone. It was like Thomas and Friends never existed. Until 2008. 2008 was a good year for me. I just started college. I was doing my HNC in acting and performance, and I was in my first serious relationship. And when you get into one of those relationships, you want to tell your partner everything about you. And I told this person about my love of Thomas and Friends and how I felt like I had to hide it from people. But instead of being creeped out by this, she understood and wanted to get me something special that reminded me of happier times. It was coming up on my 21st birthday, and she got me a mint in box Hornby Thomas the Tank Engine train set. I was absolutely ecstatic. I was over the moon. It felt like validation for putting my trust in someone, and I decided, with my birthday party coming up the following weekend, to have one last big send-off for my love of Thomas and Friends. A celebration rather than a commiseration. I had a Thomas-themed birthday party. The house was covered in Thomas banners. Everyone drank from Thomas cups, ate their food from Thomas plates. We had a Thomas birthday cake. There was Thomas music playing on the hi-fi. It was fantastic. While the fire was starting to come back for Thomas and Friends for me, I wasn't quite ready to openly admit that to my family and friends. They saw the party as a good laugh and a chance to reminisce about days gone by before you had to go back to normal and back to your grown-up life. The relationship with that person ended quite soon after this, but despite of all that person put me through, I do have to thank her because she helped bring back that love for Thomas and Friends for me. If something made me feel happy, who cares what anybody else thinks? So I started building my collection back up again, in secret, over the following few years. I got series 1 to 7 of the classic era on DVD, bought the books, and the odd piece of memorabilia here and there if there was an anniversary, like the 60th or the 65th anniversary. But I would always keep it in my memory box and keep it under my bed in secret. During this time, I met my wife, we had our kids, and I thought, if ever there's a perfect opportunity to let people see my collection and put the DVDs on and read the books, now is the best time, because I was getting to have father-son bonding moments with my kids. So I would read them the Railway series books at bedtime, or put the DVDs on when I was looking after them while my wife was at work. I'd be lying if I said that I didn't enjoy it more than my sons probably did. But despite all this, I still felt really alone in my love of Thomas and Friends. I never found anybody that enjoyed the franchise as much as I did that was around my own age. Sure, there was members of the family that would have fleeting loves of Thomas here and there, my cousins or my kids, but eventually they would move on to other things. I never found that kindred spirit. So where do most people go when they feel alone? The internet. And specifically, YouTube. I had a personal YouTube channel at the time that I didn't really have a lot of things going for. Just a lot of random videos, a ranking video here, a Q&A video there, and nothing major in the grand scheme of things. And one day I decided that I was going to do top 10 best engines video from Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends. I uploaded it, and it got some good responses for the first attempt. So I decided to do a worst engines video, and then the floodgates opened up. Thousands of views, a lot of abuse, 3 death threats, and then I thought to myself, I might have something here. Maybe I should take this a bit further. And then the pandemic hit. I've been open about my mental health struggles before, but during the pandemic, I took a severe psychotic breakdown. It was so bad that I had to be removed from my family for 6 weeks. And once I got back, I spent the rest of the year focusing on recovering. After that, I raised money for a mental health charity by recording a cover song of Flower of Scotland. And that inspired me to create my first proper YouTube channel, That Mental Ginger Show. And it took off in ways that I never knew that channels could take off. And while I was very grateful of that, I didn't know if it was a one-hit wonder or not. So I decided to create a new channel, something more niche, about a passion of mine that had lay dormant for a long time. The channel that you are watching right now. At the time, no one realised how much of a gamble it was to create the Ginger Engine. Not only was it about a market that a lot of people still had quite a stigma around, and whose best days were firmly in the rearview mirror, but it was the first time since I was a kid that I was putting my heart out of my sleeve and saying, I still like Thomas and Friends, deal with it. And it wasn't just my family and friends, it was a global audience. I knew that there was a passionate fandom after dipping my toe in the water with those previous videos, and then joining some of the Facebook groups afterwards, but not to the extent that I know of now. And for someone with severe mental health issues and a lot of insecurities, it was absolutely terrifying to put myself back out there again. But ever since that first video dropped on the 10th of January 2022, I've never looked back. People always talk about a weight being lifted off your shoulders. This was like someone had lifted Diesel 10 off of my shoulders. The response from the fandom has largely been positive. The opportunities I've had off the back of it, such as voiceover work, have been fantastic. And the community that I built on my channel is one of respect and tolerance. In so many parts of this fandom, there are a lot of negative Nancy's, as I call them. They focus on the bad times of the franchise and try and drag it down. I don't believe in doing that. I want to try and keep my channel as positive as I can, even when I'm having to dive into the doldrums of the bad eras. Does it have its downsides? Of course it does. Every channel has a downside. Not many people out with the fandom understand why I do the Ginger Engine, or why I choose to do in-depth analysis videos on talking trains. It's easier to rationalise it now that the channel's making a little bit of money, and it's a passion that I'm slowly turning into a career by creating other channels in other niches and bringing on more people. It's something that if you're not a part of the fandom, you will never truly understand. But at the same time, you don't need to. The Ginger Engine has given me so much back, and not just in terms of content creation, but also as a human being. It's given me my confidence back. So instead of hiding my passion about Thomas and Friends, I openly talk about it now. Instead of hiding my collections, I let people see it, if they so choose. If I have an hour or so after the family and my wife are in bed, I'll dig out a Railway series book, and I'll read it not out of an obligation to create a video, but because I love the stories, and I want to unwind with a good book. Now that I'm older, and not necessarily any wiser, I see a lot of parallels between Thomas and Friends the franchise and myself growing up. There's been some great eras, there's been some bad eras, and a lot of behind the scenes changes that shaped what it's become today. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, that's a matter of opinion. After all these years, we have both built a solid reputation that can't be taken away from us. And that gives me great comfort as we both look forward to an uncertain future. Thank you to everybody for watching this rather offbeat video. And until next time, keep on chugging.